Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed watching Keyboard Fantasies, the Beverly Glenn-Copeland story. My name is Scott Fitzpatrick. I'm one of the programmers here at the Gimli Film Festival, and I'm joined by Posy Dixon, the film's director, to talk a bit more about Keyboard Fantasies. So first, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your work with the Gimli Film Festival. We're so happy to be able to include it in our program. And I guess before we get into talking about the film, could you just maybe introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work as a documentarian and a bit about maybe your production company, Luca?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching our film. I am, what am I? I'm a filmmaker. I live in London. I run a production company called Luca, which is a very small independent, we like to call it a blob, a kind of organism that creates films with a network of wonderful people. So yeah, I came up through the filmmaking world, actually through Vice like 10, 12 years ago, which I guess was a place where people were learning to make films in a very DIY way. So I came up through that, and then, yeah, have just been kind of following my nose through filmmaking practice over the past 10 years, which has led me into the world of documentary. I work a lot around music, around identity, around kind of areas where science, culture, and the arts collide. Yeah, whatever fascinates me.
Oh, very cool. So I guess that's like a great segue into talking about this film. And I'm just curious about how you, not only were you introduced to Glenn, the person, and the documentary subject, but also just Glenn's music in general, and how you came to arrive at telling this story.
Yeah, so this story very much started with the music, and I hope that's kind of held out through the film. The whole thing started with the music, with that record, Keyboard Fantasies. I heard it, like, here in London we have a very rich music community, and music gets played and you hear it. We have an incredible radio station called NTS that program incredible musicians and DJs to share their music taste. So I heard this record, I got obsessed with this record, which I think a lot of people do. Not like obsessed, but like just like, what is this? And like, what's this voice? And where did this come from? It feels so timeless. So I started kind of digging around, trying to find Beverly Glenn-Copeland. Eventually found Glenn, kind of hit him up on Facebook, and we started talking on Skype for about a year, just about like music and life and spirituality, and like hashing out what filming with Glenn could look like, recording his music. It was all very music driven in the first place. And then eventually I found my way to Canada to go and meet him after about a year of conversation, to record some music with him and film some music. And then in the process of doing that, I shot an interview as well. And it was after a week of spending time with Glenn that I was like, okay, there's a film here. There's a really big, incredible story, and a very important person to give voice to, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I guess I've seen you directed like a music video for Ever New as well with Glenn, and so I'm curious about like at what point in your relationship it turned into a documentary film versus just like a friendship.
Yeah, I guess that time when I went out to Canada to shoot that music video for Avenue, I'd been trying to persuade someone to give me a couple of £1,000 to go and film Glenn playing and an interview with him and make like a short film about him, but no one would give me any money. I got a cancellation fee for a commercial job, so I was just like, right, I'm going. Just got on a plane and went to Nova Scotia on my own with about 3 days notice. But we did that music. We did a whole day of filming music and recording, and then the following day I did an interview with Glenn. But it was actually in that trip I was driving everywhere, and I like drove up because Glenn was living in New Brunswick, so I drove 4 hours north and then 4 hours south and then 4 hours west, and we spent hours in the car together. And it was then that all the stories came out, and I just realized like how rich, so many things, like how rich a story it was in the context of the time that Glenn was living, and also what an incredible storyteller Glenn was. I think also I met that band then, the young band that you see in the film, who are all just like incredible characters. And I just remember thinking, it was that moment of like, it's these young people and Glenn together. It's like, this is magical, you know? So it was really off the back of that trip that we decided to take the plunge and make a big film.
And I guess, yeah, that's I'm wondering how, once it became a film and it was a documentary project, how involved was Glenn in the documentary decision-making process, and in the shape of the film as it came along?
Not very involved at all, actually. He's been incredibly like trusting and open and generous from the get-go. But insofar as the editing process, which is obviously where the film really comes together, I asked him when we had a rough cut. Well, there was one that obviously we tell his history, which is such a responsibility, and I was so aware of the weight of that responsibility and getting that right. So obviously asking him for archive and stories and memories and contacts to try and piece his history together. And he very much lives in the moment, Glenn. He's a practicing Buddhist, and he's writing new music, and he's not super interested in looking back on the past too much. So we really constructed the visuals to accompany a story ourselves. And he didn't see anything until the film was complete. Like, I asked him if he wanted to see a rough cut, and he was like, no, honey, I trust you. I'll watch it when you're finished. You know, he's like, I want to see it when it's done. So yeah, like showing it to him was so nerve-wracking. I can't even tell you. And I said, he didn't answer for like 2 days, and I was like, oh God. But then he loved it, and he had no changes or notes, and so I got it right, which I'm good.
Oh, good. Yeah, that would be nerve-wracking, not getting a response.
I could see he'd been on Facebook, and I was like, to my producer Liv, I was like, he's been on Facebook, he's been online, but he hasn't answered my email. Ah!
Watching the play counts on Vimeo. And
yeah, totally.
Okay, so can you tell me a bit about there is a lot of archival material in the film. There's Glenn's personal archives, but there's also broader use of archival footage. And we have a lot of work using strategies of appropriation and found footage throughout the festival. Can you tell us a bit about your approach to working with archival materials and what your strategies of appropriation are?
Yeah, so I like that term, strategies of appropriation.
Yeah, that's a Penny Lane coined phrase. We had her at the festival last year, and she showed a masterclass on strategies of appropriations. I've been using it since.
Nice. So yeah, I'm going to write that down. So what was our approach with that? So basically, I wanted the first half of the film to live as like an audio-visual tapestry of Glenn's life, pre-Keyboard Fantasies. So this kind of 1940s to mid-1980s period. And I wanted the audio to follow that timeline, and the visuals to kind of aesthetically fall in line with that journey through time. So we had a problem in that I had obviously like such a rich oral history given from Glenn, but no backing up voices and no visuals barely to go with it whatsoever. So we went about a combination of, from the get-go, it was like, this is never going to be a literal translation of Glenn's story, because we don't have any of the literal materials. So we're going to use archive, and we're going to purposefully be not, a tiny bit abstract with it, and use representative images that express Glenn's story and that go hand in hand with the importance of music to his story as well. So the footage is a combination of stuff that we shot ourselves on Super 8 and 16mm. We did a reenactment of Glenn's father playing classical piano, which Glenn, when he saw, just like, that was, I think, the thing that hit him hardest from everything in the film. It was the thing that he had the most visceral reaction to. But then we also have, like, there's a motif that runs all the way through of, like, trains and trams, these sort of like transport footage, and that's just taken from YouTube, from like travel enthusiast sites on YouTube. So it's a real, and then obviously we've got some historical archive. So it's a real mission mash of images hunted, either created or hunted down through the internet, to kind of as holistically as possible represent that journey from the 40s to the 80s.
And I guess there's using that kind of archival material and just telling Glenn's story, it brings up so many different kind of political stories and stories about identity. And I noticed on some of the description for the film online that you have, it talks about how Glenn is constantly the outsider in all kinds of contexts. Can you talk a bit about how the work explores identity and how you approached telling a story that explores so many facets of identity?
Sure. So I think that the idea, I think the thing that I'm always attracted to, I guess, within a lot of the people who I work with as a filmmaker are the people who, the word that always comes to me are like the brave people. And it's the people who have transgressed normative identities, normative behaviors, normative ideals, and like stepped out of line in their time. And it's always contextual. It always depends on where someone's coming from and when they're coming from. But I always feel like there's certain people in the world who live their lives in a way, perform their identities in a way which is brave, and which then it sort of like trailblazers for other people. It creates space for other people to grow and to explore their identities. So I think that Glenn really represents to me someone that's done that their entire life. And I think that as a young person, there's something really powerful in meeting someone who's in their mid-70s, who's been living that life their whole life, you know?
Yeah, I really I appreciate the description of Glenn. As I read, I don't know if it was your copy or someone else's, but our newly appointed queer elder. That was such a lovely way of kind of describing how people are responding to Glenn and his work, especially now.
Yeah, and I think also he has this and I think it's a lot to do with the fact that he is an elder. And, you know, one of the big themes that was super important to me in this film is intergenerational exchange. And there's something about Glenn, I think it's a combination of him being an elder, of him being a practicing Buddhist. He has this incredibly calm, he has this very calm attitude and this incredible way of communicating and telling his story and articulating his gender expressions, his sexuality expressions, his artistic expressions. And I think to spend time with that is a really nourishing thing, and can be nourishing for people in all different kind of states of trauma or of confusion or of, you know, he's a healing soul.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. And on the subject of intergenerational kind of stories, I was curious why there's not too much about Glenn's role on Mr. Dress-Up in the movie. Did you want to talk about kind of how you chose to whittle down the story that you chose to tell, and maybe some of the omissions that you had to make?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, there were definitely decisions of what had to be omitted in the film for a couple of reasons. But I think the thing that led me the whole way through a lot of decision making within this film was to focus on the musical journey and the story of Glenn's music, because it gave me a kind of anchor to hold on to when I was making decisions about what was included and what wasn't included. Because obviously when you're telling somebody's, you know, 75 years of their life and the context, it can suddenly become this huge thing. And I think for me to be able to focus on music as my kind of guiding anchor, and then everything can come off that, gave me a way to deal with that volume of knowledge and of story. So there's that. And then on top of that, so I think in that respect, the Mr. Dress-Up narrative and story is one thing that kind of fell outside of it. It was almost like a bit of a hiatus in Glenn's musical career. And he was making music obviously through that work, but it was a slightly different limb. And on top of that, on a very practical level, the licensing costs for the Dress-Up, astronomical. So, you know.
That's funny. Yeah, fair enough. I guess on that subject, can you tell us a bit about how you funded this project? I saw there was a Kickstarter that kind of got this going. Can you tell us about how you made this project happen?
Yeah, of course, of course. Because I never thought it would. So like I said, like the first small chunk of money to get me to Nova Scotia came from a cancellation fee. So I just see that as a gift from the fairies, because it was literally free money, like money for not working. So I was like, I'm going to go and put that to good use. And then yeah, off the back of that, we did a crowdfunding project so we could shoot the second part of the film, which was when Glenn came to Europe with the band. And the reason we decided to go crowdfunded for that was actually because we had a deadline of when Glenn was coming to London for tour. So we just didn't have much time. And I was really reluctant to, or I felt kind of strange about doing a crowdfunder, because I don't think it's something you should do lightly, But given the circumstances and the fact that we had this deadline of when, if we wanted to make this film, we had to film again. So we did a small Kickstarter, and then off the back of that, we won a film fund to finish it.
Nice.
So it's a 3-step process.
Well, I'm glad it got done. It's an incredible film. I heard a Q&A, a question recently that I was like, so simple. Why have I not been asking this for years? Can you tell us just about like the most fun part of making this movie?
Oh man.
Or one of the most fun parts?
The most fun part by a million miles was when Glenn and the band came to Europe for the first time. At that point, they were just not very well known, and they had no recorded video of them or anything. So none of the promoters, they were having a real hard time booking them shows because people just didn't know who they were or what they would sound like or how they would perform. So by the time Glenn was coming here, they had like very little, they were very short on funds and very short on shows. So I actually ended up with the band stayed in my flat. My neighbours took in, so 2 of the band stayed in my front room. My neighbours upstairs in the apartment building took in another 2 of the band, because they're Canadian. So it's like the Canadian mafia came in. And Glenn stayed in an Airbnb next door. And for like that whole tour week, we just like hung out as a family unit, and it was so much fun. And then we all got in a van and drove to Europe together, and yeah, it was so much fun. It was the funnest way to make a film.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. All of the footage of Glenn interacting with his band is just like magic. It's so nice.
Yeah. And it was such a like blending of work and life, and like trying to figure out, it's just like it's in your home. Like, when do we start recording? I don't know. Shit.
Time. Well, thanks again so much for sharing the movie with us. It's one of my favorites at the festival, and it's been really great talking to you about it. Thanks again to everybody at home for watching Keyboard Fantasies, and check out lots more at the festival.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.